Welcome back to Crypto Equation, and today we are stepping into one of the most defining shifts in global finance because something enormous just surfaced, something that has gone unnoticed by most of the world, yet it represents one of the clearest signals that the global banking system is marching toward a single unavoidable destination, the digital settlement era, and at the center of that transformation sits Ripple XRP. When we say 10,000 banks just sent an alert, we are not talking about a literal message or a breaking headline. We are talking about a synchronized global movement, a shift in infrastructure, a migration in technology, a coordinated transformation so large and so unified that it feels like an invisible alarm bell is ringing across the financial world. Most people have no idea what is happening because they are still watching price charts and debating speculation while the biggest institutions on earth are modernizing everything beneath them. The public sees nothing, and yet the banking system is screaming change. To understand this alert, you have to understand the systems banks rely on every single day. The global financial world is not powered by money, it is powered by messaging. Before a payment moves, a message moves. Before liquidity shifts, data shifts. Before banks settle value, they settle information. And the world's largest banks, over 10,000 of them, are all migrating into a new messaging framework, one that demands speed, accuracy, structure, interoperability, and real-time alignment. This shift is not optional. It is mandatory, and any shift in messaging forces a shift in settlement. This is the alert. When banks change the way they communicate, they must change the way they move money. And when banks must change the way they move money, they must adopt new rails, new liquidity mechanisms, new settlement logic. This is why the migration of thousands of banks is not just a technical upgrade, it is the beginning of the collapse of old financial architecture. The alert is not a warning. The alert is the sound of transformation. Now let us break this down step by step because the deeper we go, the more obvious it becomes why XRP sits at the center of this transition. The first layer of the alert is the modernization mandate. Financial systems across the world are being forced to upgrade. Slow rails no longer work. Delayed settlement no longer works. Outdated messaging no longer works. Banks must adapt or become irrelevant. This pressure is not coming from crypto. It is coming from global commerce, from corporate demands, from digital economies, from the rise of tokenization, from the emergence of real-time systems, and from the reality that the financial world can no longer operate on technology from the 1970s. The second layer of the alert is the synchronization of systems. 10,000 banks are aligning their frameworks into a unified language. When a system adopts a single structured language, it becomes interoperable. When it becomes interoperable, settlement must evolve. This is why the alignment of global messaging systems creates the conditions for real-time settlement to become mandatory. This is where XRP enters the conversation because real-time settlement is not possible with fiat alone. Banks cannot move value instantly across borders through traditional rails. They require a neutral bridge asset, not a regional currency, not a volatile commodity, a neutral digital asset with instant settlement capabilities. This is where the alert becomes unavoidable. The global system is moving into a world XRP was engineered for. Now let us examine the third layer of the alert, the exposure of pre-funded accounts. Banks all over the world are currently locking away trillions of dollars just to move value slowly across borders. This is an outdated model that drains liquidity, weakens efficiency, and slows the global economy. As banks modernize messaging, they also expose the inefficiency of their settlement processes. The moment this inefficiency is exposed, institutions begin searching for solutions that eliminate pre-funding. The solution is on-demand liquidity. And on-demand liquidity requires a digital asset capable of bridging currencies instantly across the world. XRP is one of the only assets designed to do this at scale. This is the alert. The world's financial structure is revealing its weaknesses, and XRP solves one of the biggest weaknesses of all. Now let us go deeper into the fourth layer, the rise of tokenized assets. Tokenization is not coming. It is here. Government bonds, corporate debt, real estate commodities, equities, treasury systems, all are being prepared for tokenized markets. Tokenized markets cannot rely on slow settlement rails. They require real-time mechanisms. They require automated liquidity. They require interoperability across chains and across borders. This is exactly the role XRP was designed for. The more tokenization expands, the more the system demands fast, neutral liquidity. This is the alert. Banks are not preparing for crypto speculation. They are preparing for tokenized value movement. Now let us break apart the fifth layer, the hidden absorption of liquidity. Most people still believe XRP will always remain on public markets. But institutional systems do not buy assets to trade them. They buy assets to use them. They buy assets to lock them into corridors. They buy assets to support settlement. They buy assets to automate flows. Every time a bank begins using XRP, the supply available to the public shrinks. This is not theory. This is how infrastructure works. Once absorbed into the system, the asset does not return to the open market. This is the silent supply shock forming beneath XRP. And banks upgrading their systems are the ones accelerating this shift. Now let us expose the sixth layer of the alert, the timeline. Why now? Why suddenly? Why simultaneously across 10,000 institutions? Because the global financial world is transitioning into real-time money. Real-time payroll, real-time invoices, real-time treasury flows, real-time international settlement, real-time commerce, real-time programmable finance, real-time everything, and real-time demands rails that can support instantaneous settlement. Only a few digital assets are engineered for this purpose. Even fewer are neutral. Even fewer are scalable. Even fewer fit the regulatory direction banks must follow. The list becomes extremely small, and XRP sits near the top. This is the alert. The world is entering a phase where instant settlement stops being a feature and becomes a requirement. Now let us examine the seventh layer of the alert, the centralized adoption curve. Banks operate in stages. They test for years. They pilot quietly. They prepare internally. Then they deploy suddenly and all at once. This is the pattern behind every major financial upgrade in history. Right now, banks are in the final stages of internal preparation. The next stage is deployment. Deployment absorbs liquidity. Deployment reduces exchange supply. Deployment activates corridors. Deployment shifts the entire financial landscape. This is the alert. The system is almost ready to turn on. Now let us examine the eighth layer of the alert, the regulatory convergence. Regulators around the world are not coordinating on speculation. They are coordinating on infrastructure. They want transparency. They want compliance. They want structured data. They want interoperable systems. They want real-time reporting. These requirements match the world XRP was built to serve. This is why XRP continues appearing in discussions about interoperability, settlement, tokenization, and liquidity, because XRP is not a meme coin. It is not a random token. It is not a speculative gamble. It is infrastructure waiting for activation. And 10,000 banks have just completed one of the biggest steps required to activate the future. This is the alert. Not a warning, but a signal that the financial rails beneath our feet are shifting. In part 2, we will go deeper into the institutional alignment, the internal liquidity models, the supply dynamics, the settlement timelines, the infrastructural shift, and why 10,000 banks upgrading at the same time represents one of the strongest XRP signals in digital asset history. Because now that we have uncovered how 10,000 banks have synchronized their infrastructure, we must go deeper into what this shift represents and why it is one of the biggest indicators that the financial system is preparing for a new form of liquidity, one that cannot be supported by slow rails, outdated messaging, or traditional cross-border mechanics. The alert is not a warning. It is a transition signal, a sign that the old plumbing of finance is being dismantled quietly while a new structure is being assembled beneath the surface. And that new structure requires something the old world could never provide: real-time global liquidity. This is where the alignment between institutional modernization and XRP becomes impossible to ignore. The first deeper layer we must examine is the institutional liquidity model, because settlement is not about sending money. It is about freeing liquidity trapped inside the system. When banks modernize their messaging, they expose their liquidity inefficiencies. This is why the migration of 10,000 banks is not random. It is coordinated. It is structured. It is aligned with the global goal of freeing trillions of dollars trapped in Nostro and Vostro accounts. These accounts exist because the old world needed pre-funded liquidity to move value across borders. But the digital world cannot operate this way. Pre-funding kills speed. Pre-funding kills liquidity. Pre-funding kills efficiency. The new world requires on-demand liquidity. And on-demand liquidity requires a neutral bridge asset capable of settling value instantly in any direction. This is where the alert gets louder. The modernization of banks is not happening in isolation. It is happening in preparation for the global removal of pre-funded accounts. This is the moment XRP was designed for. Now let us examine the second, deeper layer, the creation of real-time money. Real-time payments are no longer optional. Governments demand them. Corporations demand them. Consumers demand them. Treasury networks demand them. The financial world is being forced into instant value movement, but real-time messaging cannot function without real-time settlement. If messaging becomes instant, but settlement remains slow, the system collapses under inefficiency. This is why banks modernizing their messaging is not a small update. It forces a settlement evolution. It forces liquidity evolution. It forces infrastructure evolution. This is the alert. The world cannot move into real-time commerce without real-time liquidity. Now let us explore the third deeper layer, the interoperability mandate. Digital currencies, CBDCs, tokenized assets, corporate blockchains, and financial platforms are being built all over the world. But none of these systems can communicate smoothly if they are isolated. Interoperability is mandatory, and interoperability requires neutral liquidity, not local currencies, not volatile tokens, not speculative assets, a neutral bridge asset capable of connecting value across networks. This is exactly the problem XRP was built to solve. And the modernization of 10,000 banks shows the world is finally moving into a structure where interoperability is no longer optional. Now let us understand the fourth deeper layer, the liquidity compression that occurs when global systems move into real-time operation. Liquidity compression means that the same amount of liquidity must support exponentially more value movement. If banks adopt real-time operations, they need far more efficient liquidity models. This is why digital settlement assets become essential. Without them, the system either slows down or collapses under pressure. This is the alert. The world is entering a phase where instant liquidity becomes the foundation of financial operation. Now let us examine the fifth deeper layer, the rise of automated settlement. Automation is taking over financial systems, smart contracts, programmable finance, tokenized bonds, tokenized treasuries, automated corporate flows. These systems settle value automatically. Automated systems cannot wait for slow settlement rails. They require instant finality. This instant finality requires digital liquidity. Digital liquidity must be neutral. Digital liquidity must be fast. Digital liquidity must be globally scalable. XRP fits this requirement. This is the alert. Banks are preparing for automation, and automation requires new rails. Now let us dive into the sixth deeper layer, the global consolidation of financial messaging. 10,000 banks synchronizing their messaging frameworks is not a coincidence. It is the early stage of a global unification of financial communication. Once unified, the next step is unified settlement. This is where a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity emerges. If the world adopts unified settlement rails, the value flowing through those rails will dwarf anything the financial markets have ever seen, and whatever asset becomes the neutral liquidity mechanism for those rails becomes one of the most important digital assets on Earth. This is the alert. When messaging unifies, settlement must follow, and when settlement follows, liquidity must evolve. Now let us expose the seventh deeper layer, the hidden timelines behind global coordination. Most people do not understand that banking upgrades occur on multi-year schedules designed behind closed doors long before the public sees the results. The migration happening now began planning cycles ago. Banks do not update systems for no reason. Banks update when they are preparing for structural upgrades. Banks update when they are preparing for new frameworks. Banks update when the world is moving in a new direction. This is that direction, and XRP sits at the crossroads of it. Now let us explore the eighth deeper layer, the infrastructural inevitability. The world cannot continue using rails that take days to move value, when everything else in the digital world happens instantly. Instant communication, instant identity, instant authorization, instant verification, instant contracts. The only thing that lagged was settlement. This lag forces a new system to emerge. That new system requires instant settlement. Instant settlement requires digital liquidity. Digital liquidity requires an asset engineered for speed and neutrality. This is the alert. The world is being pushed into a financial environment that aligns perfectly with XRP's design. Now let us go deeper into the ninth layer, the collapse of liquidity silos. Today, liquidity is fragmented across borders. Every country, every bank, every institution operates in isolated liquidity pools. These pools restrict value flow. The new financial world will unify these pools. Unification requires bridge liquidity. Bridge liquidity requires a digital settlement mechanism, a mechanism that is neutral, non-sovereign, fast, efficient, and globally accessible. This is why XRP continues emerging in discussions surrounding global liquidity. This is the alert. Liquidity silos are collapsing and new digital bridges are being prepared. Now let us analyze the 10th deeper layer, the approaching supply transition. The more the financial world moves into digital settlement, the more XRP will be absorbed into operational systems rather than retail markets. Operational systems do not release liquidity back into the market. They lock it, they automate it, they reuse it, they do not sell it. This means that the supply accessible to the public will continue to shrink. This is the alert. Banks modernizing their systems signals future supply scarcity. Now let us go even deeper into the 11th layer, the shift in how financial institutions think about digital assets. The leak you saw in the previous script about ETFs becomes even more relevant here. If institutions believe that XRP will eventually become part of global settlement infrastructure, they cannot rely on retail markets to supply them with liquidity. They must prepare now, and the modernization of thousands of banks is the early signal of that preparation. Now let us explore the 12th deeper layer, the global liquidity race. Countries and institutions are racing to modernize their systems first because whoever controls the rails controls efficiency. Whoever controls efficiency controls capital flow. Whoever controls capital flow controls economic influence. And the rails being built are digital. This is the alert. The world is entering a race that XRP is perfectly positioned to serve. Now let us expose the 13th deeper layer, the hidden reason this alert matters for XRP holders. Banks do not move in groups unless something big is coming. 10,000 banks upgrading systems simultaneously is not coincidence. It is not routine. It is not random. It is coordinated. And coordinated upgrades always precede major structural shifts. This is the signal that the digital settlement era is no longer theoretical. It is beginning. Now let us explore the 14th deeper layer, the beginning of institutional absorption. When the new settlement systems activate, liquidity pools will be created across corridors. These pools will require XRP or a similar neutral asset. The moment liquidity is placed in these pools, it becomes locked. Locked liquidity creates scarcity. Scarcity creates structural value. Structural value creates demand. Demand increases absorption. Absorption reduces circulating supply. Reduced supply changes everything. This is the alert. We are entering the early stages of a future where XRP becomes part of the system, not part of the market. Now let us break down the 15th deeper layer, the move toward global synchronization. The financial system is aligning more quickly than anyone expected. Central banks, commercial banks, payment networks, clearing houses, treasury systems, global organizations. Their timelines are converging. This convergence is not about crypto. It is about infrastructure. When the world aligns, infrastructure must adapt. This is the alert. The direction of the world is becoming impossible to ignore. Now let us bring all these layers together into the final truth. 10,000 banks did not send a message. They sent a signal. A signal that the era of slow settlement is ending. A signal that the world's liquidity structure is being rebuilt. A signal that the digital rails are almost ready. A signal that the future belongs to assets that can move value at the speed of information. A signal that XRP is positioned exactly where the financial world is heading. The alert is not a prediction. It is a transformation. It is happening quietly. It is happening structurally. It is happening globally. And when the new rails activate, the world will realize that XRP was never designed to be a speculative digital token. It was designed to become the liquidity engine of the modern financial world. 10,000 banks have already taken the first step. The rest of the world will follow. They want structured data. They want interoperable systems. They want real-time reporting. These requirements match the world XRP was built to serve. This is why XRP continues appearing in discussions about interoperability, settlement, tokenization, and liquidity. Because XRP is not a meme coin. It is not a random token. It is not a speculative gamble. It is infrastructure waiting for activation. And 10,000 banks have just completed one of the biggest steps required to activate the future. This is the alert, not a warning, but a signal that the financial rails beneath our feet are shifting. In part 2, we will go deeper into the institutional alignment, the internal liquidity models, the supply dynamics, the settlement timelines, the infrastructural shift, and why 10,000 banks upgrading at the same time represents one of the strongest XRP signals in digital asset history.